Okay, countdown should be going. Always issues with this countdown. Well, you know what? I think that's 5 seconds already.
Okay.
So we are live. Welcome to another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. Today, I am extremely excited for my guest. Before we go into that, I'm going to talk about our show today. It's called Everything as Code, Even Business Fundamentals. Today, I am honored to have my guest, Michael Warthen, on. Let me read Michael's bio, and then we will introduce him. Michael is an enterprise-scale software architect by trade, has over 20 years of hands-on experience delivering modern technology solutions to complex problems in a variety of industries, such as financial services, media entertainment, and healthcare. His recent focus is on facilitating enterprise digital transformation. He also maintains a strong connection with the open source and startup communities. Recently, Michael was a winner in the MIT Hacking Medicine Hackathon, whose goal was to combat racism in healthcare. Because of the win, he's now part of the second largest accelerator focused on underrepresented startups. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be
here. And look, so guys, before we jump into the show, I have to get a little personal. So you have to understand the history and the backstory behind Michael being a guest and why today is so extremely special. So Mike and I went to the same high school, Brooklyn Tech in Brooklyn, New York, hence Brooklyn Tech. And we went to the same college, Temple University. Both high school and college, our high school had majors. We majored in computer science, and at Temple, we majored in computer science. We also both worked at the lab in the computer science lab in Temple University. He actually got me the gig. So to say that we have known each other for a very long time is an understatement. Part of my life intricately on multiple levels. And we obviously did business ventures together because two people in technology in the 90s, that same major, friends, same neighborhood, all that, you're going to do some business together. So we worked on numerous projects together. I am extremely happy today to have Mike on the show. It's a big deal for me. All right.
Thank you.
So that's my personal moment. Yeah. So new people new to the show, what we always do, obviously, is the Tech Behind FinTech. So we talk about technology within the financial services and also FinTech communities. And we have interesting topics. Today's topic is Everything is Code, Even Business Fundamentals. It's more of a concept Mike came up with, and we're going to drill into it. Like always, before we jump into the actual topic, we cover the news of the week. MathWorks, someone just commented on here. Okay, I don't know who MathWorks is. Well, that's somebody on YouTube. Okay, that's a YouTube commenter. Let me put it up. I'm here. I don't know. I don't see your name, but if you could put your name out so we can see it, that would be great. Okay, so jumping into the news of the week. Look, obviously, meme stocks are big with what's going on with Robinhood and Wall Street Bets. Before we even talk about that, because that could be a segue into the topic on another scale, I wanted to get into some other news articles. So, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, HMRC, is the equivalent to, oh, wow, it's Damien Earl, another friend of ours that went to college with us, part of the crew. He's here. That's awesome. What's up, Damien? Shouting you out. All right, back to the news article. So, HMRC is the equivalent to the IRS over in the UK. Currently, they did a deal with EcoSpend valued at a $3 million contract to streamline and automate parts of its payment processes. So EcoSpend was it just came out. They were around since 2017, but they were in stealth mode. So these basically won the contract. And what I found interesting about this article is the introduction of fintech within governments and working on the contract. Mike, what are your thoughts on that article?
Yeah, I mean, I think the reality is that from a fintech perspective, it's crossing everywhere, right? So
Yeah.
it's really going to be difficult for any realistic business or government body not to really start to incorporate considerations for these fintech technologies and these small companies. So I think that's a trend that's just going to simply grow from here in terms of governance. What's interesting about that, though, is that we'll talk about a little bit about this on the everything is code. Is when you get into these industries and especially in government. It's kind of a double-edged sword because you're also beholden to things like regulations and those kind of things that you have to, and that's part of the practice framework is to think about codifying those things so that you can quickly adjust and change and modify your business rules around those things. So I think that this is just going to be a trend that's going to continue.
No, it's definitely interesting. It was an interesting stat from that article that I want to touch on because it's really helping payments. Right now, the online payments for the HMRC, it's not in line with what's going on in the industry, and that's what EcoSpan comes in. A 2020 report by TrueLayer showed the use of payment initiation grew by 832% between March and July alone. The majority, 88% of the growth, was down to incumbents, which still hold the lion's share of the UK banking market. All right, so we have a couple of people chiming in. Let's see. LinkedIn user, I see what a person is Drew McKay. Dada, another Temple University alum. Welcome, Drew McKay. We have David Shanks on, he's shouting out to Damien on, we have David Shanks is another close friend of ours from Temple University and Brooklyn Tech.
Yep.
Okay, let's see another person saying, Akshay Sinha, hey guys, hey, back to you. Thanks for joining in. We appreciate you. Okay. Let's move.
I worked with Akshay, so thanks for Akshay for joining.
Oh, Akshay, what's up? Thanks for joining. Appreciate that. The next article that let's jump into. Visa reveals Bitcoin and crypto banking roadmap amid race to reach network of 70 million. So it's real interesting because years ago, Visa didn't really buy into crypto. But now, after partnering with 35 various Bitcoin and cryptocurrency platforms in recent years, the credit card company has announced it plans to help banks roll out Bitcoin and cryptocurrency buying and trading services with a Visa crypto software program set to launch later this year. Another interesting note before you jump in, Mike, First Boulevard, a Kansas-based Black-focused digital bank, will pilot the APIs designed to help Visa Bank's clients integrate Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. What are your thoughts on that, Mike?
That one's really interesting because it's all kind of sort of coming to a head at the same time. 2020 was a very interesting influence on the economy and the world, really. So not only is Visa getting into this game, which is unavoidable. I mean, at this point, it's reaching the valuation of a small country. It's just one of those things that everyone's going to get into this at some level, right? Bitcoin obviously is the big tag name, but almost there's many different varieties of the cryptocurrencies. But on top of that, they obviously chose to highlight an underrepresented organization in the fintech space as the first partner here. That's just a testament to the openness that the community is starting to have. That there's ideas and there's capabilities and there's skills across a variety of folks, and I think it's very bold on Visa's part to do both of these things at the same time and tie them together. And two, I can't wait to see what that API and framework look like and how we can take advantage of it in our future apps.
I mean, for sure. I mean, right now, that's really the game plan. As everything starts opening up, UK is really on a forerun of open banking. There are products here domestically that you can access participating banks with their API. So no, it's definitely interesting to see how we could take advantage of that for sure. So now I think a good segue is, because we talked about Robinhood last week and also the meme stocks. I want to use that in terms of the trading volumes to kind of segue into today's topic of everything is code. I don't want to get necessarily into the intentionality of limiting trades, just more from our conversation in terms of the business fundamentals around that. You talk about everything is code. What does that mean to you?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's hard in technology. It's hard to sort of be operating in the modern technology space and not really bump into these terms of, infrastructure as code or DevOps. These are things that have been gaining momentum for the past few years, and really have really been adopted as practices for a number of companies, large and small, in terms of fluid delivery, fast flow of work to deliver capability to the masses, to the customer base. And when it comes to, when we say something as code, what we really mean, I think, what the term really means to me is just making sure, I guess the other term might be codifying, right? It's just basically taking the fundamental understanding of some feature, some need, some capability, something you're trying to control, and essentially write it in a repeatable, deterministic way, right? And in technology, that tends to be in code, right? You write a structured program and it does that thing 100, a million, or 100 million times, or however many times you program it. So when we say everything is code, you're taking things that in the abstract don't seem to apply to code, like rules or logic or other things that I'm sorry, not logic. Things that might be outside of code, like how many servers do I want, right? If you're a company starting up, you might decide I need 10 servers to serve my customer base. But in reality, you can actually write that rule, that code, as a piece of information that says servers equals 10, right? This is how many I'm going to have. And now you don't, as a person, doesn't have to click. You don't have to plug in 10 servers, especially in the cloud world. Literally, you write that line of quote unquote code and it becomes reality in wherever you're running that. And that is a strong capability to sort of look at an abstract and say, well, what else can we make that easy so that not only can I establish it quickly and make it consistent that it's always 10 because I want it to be 10, but now I can also change it. If tomorrow I say, you know what, 10's too expensive, I need 5, I can change just that piece of information and the environment will react to that. Or if I say I need 50, I can change that piece of information, the environment will react to that. So whether that's, again, server count or some other feature, which we'll talk about, those are the things that you can now put into quote unquote code. It's not necessarily complex developer code, but you can now control these things with a consistent way of driving that.
So, just to give some backstory, right? Anybody, we both work in the field, as I said earlier, for a lot of years. So a lot of terms get thrown out. But let's look at it from a support perspective, right? If Mike's been in a support perspective before that I have, in which you're supporting some sort of application for whatever company that you work with, and getting that 3 a.m. call or that 4 a.m. call where something's down, it's a critical production issue. Now you have to manually log in and see what's going on. Something very interesting happened in 2008. I think that was a time that chaos engineering was introduced by Netflix, and essentially the concept behind it, which, it's so funny because I talked about it later with some financial clients and it was just looking at me like I had 2 heads. But the concept is to intentionally invoke problems in your production environment. So once you do that, things go down, and now can the system, without any human intervention, recover, right? So we see when they move to the public cloud, now you have all these resources in the cloud that, as Mike mentioned, you can codify. You can, depending on some scripts, bring up and bring down without human interaction. And that's really the direction. And in talking to Mike offline about with the Netflix scenario, right? Video is a major part of their business, right? Like, I think during the pandemic, from everybody watching Bridgerton or whatever show, like that, major shows, all Netflix or different streaming services you have. So obviously having those servers up, getting you your videos, that's a major part of their business. And Mike, with the everything is code concept, and the business fundamentals that you were breaking down, it seems like the industry took that and ran with it, right? So it's like everything has to be up all the time.
Right.
But you were talking about their business fundamentals. Dive into that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously, these things as code was created by a bunch of other people. It's just observing that and saying, well, how does that apply, and what are scenarios that show how that works? And to your point, the chaos engineering is a good example of two things, right? So the chaos engineering, the actual practice, the actual principle is really about the availability of their particular infrastructure. Why is that important to Netflix? Well, as you pointed out, it's important to Netflix because their business is in serving video. So when someone asks for it, it needs to be available. And the chaos engineering is going one step further to not just say, hey, we'll codify our environment to say, hey, we think we need 10, or we think we need to quickly go to 15 because more people are requesting something. But it also is, the chaos engineering specifically is about risk. It's saying, hey, we know in the real life, in the real world, servers, people, things are unpredictable. There is chaos. So lean into that chaos, accept that fact. And in the chaos engineering, which is a little bit different from the framework I'm talking about, but in the chaos engineering is saying, hey, inject that chaos on purpose and see what happens. It's an experiment. Experiment safely, so that you don't see this problem for the first time when it's critical mass and your fundamentals are at risk. Your fundamental ability to deliver video is at risk. Now that doesn't mean Netflix never had an outage. They never had I've seen the circle spinning or whatever. I don't even know what it looks like now because I haven't seen it in a very long time. But early on, Netflix had those moments, and I think that part of their framework helped them to reduce those moments.
No, so that's definitely interesting. Let's see. We have another comment. Chris Vernon gives us a thumbs up. So Chris is another friend.
Reunion there.
It's definitely a reunion. He's high school. We all still keep in touch. Computer science major as well, but different university. Shout out to Hampton. So now with that said, with the concept that you're talking about, I want to dive into it and unpack it. So let's go for it.
Mm-hmm.
So, like with the business fundamental side and the codification, let's dive into it.
Sure. Yeah. So if you think about what we've been talking about so far, it's been heavily focused on infrastructure, right? And to be honest, for legitimately so, that's been where cloud computing and that adoption has really been focused on. Infrastructure, on things where I don't have to manage something physical anymore. Now it's all virtual, and because it's virtual, it's easier to change quickly, and therefore I can theoretically codify instructions to say I want this many and keep it at this many, and that's important, right? The infrastructure, and there's a bunch of other things that we'll pull up later that relate to all of these, these kind of risk management. But if you take it all the way down to its brass tacks, at the end of the day, again, I think what you're managing across all these aspects is risk. And the biggest risk any company can really, face is risks to its fundamental operation, right? The thing that company exists for and the metrics or measurements that are critical to that company being successful and being in existence. Right. And we all know, and especially for the entrepreneurs of the world here on the call, we know how brittle that really is. Right. To have a failed business, you very much remember why you failed. And it's something that you either, didn't watch or couldn't control. And those things are what I would put into the category of those fundamentals. Right. If you know that let's say for whatever reason, let's use the Robinhood example. Right. Again, not making any judgment on whether they did something legal or illegal or right or wrong. But at the end of the day, if they had, and from the outside looking in, it looks like this might be the case, if they had a situation where they couldn't cover or meet regulatory requirements or cover the cost of the volumes that they were seeing on this particular, on a particular meme stock that was getting some excitement or for whatever reason, it does make sense that in that situation, you would want to control that bleeding so that it doesn't put you out of business, right? So if that's If that's an area of something that's fundamental to you, being able to trade and being able to allow others to trade and keep your platform alive and keep the regulatory restrictions in check, then by definition you want to protect that, right? And I can tell you whether they do or not. I don't know anything about Robinhood at all, but I can tell you if they had the rules to be able to stop trading on a particular stock codified, I'm sure they were very happy to have that because they were able to do it very quickly, right? The other scenario is potentially they had people burning the midnight oil, writing code to go and pushing code to production to the production environment to consumers to now stop trading these specific stocks. And then they have to undo that later if they want to now allow trading. Much more chaos, much more work on their part. So codification of something like that to protect their business, if that's why they did it, is kind of a good example of why you do that. Now, there's a billion examples, Netflix and their servers and all these other things. But that kind of relates to the idea that, look, there's chaos out there. You don't know what the customer is going to do, and you don't know when they're going to do it. So things that are fundamentally protecting your business are the things you want to have quick access to change, and you want them to be reliably controlled when you decide the change needs to happen.
I mean, it's an interesting concept because, in looking at disaster recovery, high availability, we always think about the technology behind it, right? So even if there's a natural disaster, it could impact where your servers are located. So now we have to go to a different region, especially in the cloud. It's easy to do that versus on-prem data centers where, those things, they're still around, obviously, but a lot of new companies are more native to the cloud. So you can easily shut one region down and go to another. So it sounds like to me what you're saying is a disaster recovery for your business fundamentals, not necessarily disasters or technology going down, but the actual things that are intricate that are needed for your business. That's how I interpret it.
Yeah, if you're adopting practices to say, think about it. Is your fundamentals that I need servers in Europe and servers in US?
No.
Maybe it is, right? Depends on what it is. But
okay.
You're spending a lot of money, keeping two regions up, right? But here's the thing: those two regions might be up, but if your your transaction volume goes higher than what you can fulfill, and that puts you at risk to go out of business, you can have 8,000 servers in 8 regions. Great for you, but you're going to go out of business anyway because you didn't protect that particular fundamental. So what I'm saying is you want to be able to do it at that server level and that infrastructure level in disaster recovery. But what we're talking about is really taking a very old school concept of business rules and business and fundamental controls to control the business outcome and codify that and make that part of your solution. Now, I want to be clear, right? Traditionally, all code is always logic, right? People, developers are writing code to say, if this transaction is greater than 1,000, then do something, right? That is typical logic in you writing code, but it's embedded in a language and it's embedded in something you have to compile and turn into computer language and push out. My suggestion is we take these practices where the codification of these rules are kind of abstracted from the logic, and they're easy to change and manipulate. And it's not a new idea by any stretch, but it's just taking that concept of protecting our server infrastructure and saying, hey, how do we protect our business infrastructure, our business itself?
And a note of correction before. So yeah, when you have, in terms of regulatory like GDPR, you can have servers in different places in data. So I stand corrected on that. I just thought about that. But let's get into that, right? We have the fundamentals. We have regulatory concerns. Would you consider regulatory concerns part of the business fundamentals? Because if it is definitely. In the framework that I'll share with you, I separated it. And again, this is a framework just for conversation's sake. There's no formal framework or anything like that. And I'm sure. So wait, I want to stop you right there. But this is how frameworks start, right? It's the seed, it's the idea, and then somebody else takes it, and it becomes. And you heard it first on the Tech Behind FinTech. So
there you go. Yeah. But the bottom line is, especially in financial services and FinTech. The regulatory environment there and in healthcare as well is so it's a landmine, right? So, it is worth separating that. But what you'll find is probably the way to manage that is very similar to what I'm talking about in terms of managing customer behavior and managing, economic protections for your business fundamental. But I think it warrants its own area, because those things are not decisions you make; they're decisions the governing bodies make and impose upon you, right? So you still want to have the flexibility, you still want to be able to change, but those rules are typically imposed upon you that you have to meet that standard. Whereas the business fundamentals and things like that are things you have to decide what's appropriate for your business and apply them. So that's the only distinction, but you typically would apply them in a very similar way, which we'll talk about.
All right, Mike, let's get into this. Let's share a screen. So, guys,
Sure.
This is the 14th episode. This is the first time we're doing a screen share. So I'm excited about it.
No pressure.
No pressure. Hope it works, right? And I think Mike has a cool acronym he came up with, so we're gonna like go through that right now.
Sorry, this thing opened up. Okay, here we go. Share screen, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, Nnamdi, you have to tell me if it works, because I won't get this.
Okay, yeah. You have to put your put the actual. Yeah, that's better. All right, I'm gonna share it right now.
Okay. All right.
All right, here we go. Let's jump into it. So we have practice. That's the risk area. Mike, break these things down for us. This is your baby.
Sure. So first of all, practice. The reason why that acronym sort of came together is really because it underscores something that I'm asking everyone to do involved in any of this stuff, which is to you can call it practice, repeat, test, whatever you want to call it, but you have to continuously exercise these muscles. So practice is a way of thinking about, practice makes perfect is the phrase. So in theory, you would want to practice these things as frequently as possible in terms of making sure that the things you've codified do what you expect them to do to protect these areas. The majority of this are things that are, very much common, especially in modern DevOps and modern technology. I just kind of bake them in because they are important, right? And as we talked about, they're focused on infrastructure. So you have things like partnerships. Partnerships is a way of addressing the idea that you have dependency between integrated partners, right? You have a capability, someone else has another capability, and either one directional or both directions, you depend on each other. And typically that's implemented in some sort of API. For those who don't understand what that means, it's application programming interface. It's just a way for literally the plug on the left-hand side is what it is. One thing plugs into the other, and you agree on what that shape of that plug looks like and what information flows across that. So that's typically implemented in a codification terms as some sort of agreement or document. Open API and Swagger, or Open API is just another version of Swagger, are common types of ways of doing that, where you share that document, and it's usually in a code format called JSON or YAML, which we'll talk about. And that defines the contract between those two partners. So that's an area where, again, nothing new here. That is just kind of recognizing that that's a very common practice there. You want me to keep going?
Of course.
Okay. Regulatory, which you asked about, that's the thing. It's like regulatory things are table stakes. So you cannot be in game X if you don't meet the regulatory rules of game X in the sovereignty in which you operate, right? Whether that's Europe and the GDPR things, or I know Luxembourg and Germany have very specific rules. There's many across the world. Obviously, U.S. and we have our laws and things like that. So those regulations are things that you have to do to operate your business. So to your point, they are fundamental to your business. They're just controlled by an external party. And very, very often you'll see them as, I put YAML there, but it really is just markup language. Typically, they did a good job, I think, years ago of coming at least to the XML standard, extensible markup language. And a lot of information from a regulatory perspective gets pushed out and pulled in through that XML format. And what's happened is, each of these areas of concern, whether it's some sort of reporting requirement or some other regulation, takes on a tailored version of that XML. But as technology changes, things like YAML and JSON are also finding their ways into these controls. But again, these are YAML in particular it stands for yet another markup language. It's a very simple structure. It's basically statements like paragraphs, and it says this shall be true, right? This is essentially what it's saying. It's like a configuration. This will be on, this will be off, and it's a custom language, but it's basically just words that define what the state of the configuration should be, and that is code, right? It's not a complex code like if you're familiar with languages like C and C++ or Java or JavaScript. Those are just a handful of them. Python, but it is code in the sense that it's a programmatic technical document that defines the state that things should be in, and therefore it is something that you can code, but it's much easier to understand what you're changing and what you're doing rather than looking at like complex code flow.
Nice.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please do. So I was going to take a moment to see if we had any questions. So we have partnerships and we moved into regulatory. So I just want to take a pause, see if any questions. Okay, it doesn't seem like we have questions at this point. Please, let's proceed with the availability aspect.
Sure, availability is what we talked about, right? It's the Netflix scenario where, this is the very commonly when people think about X as code or what have you, infrastructure as code is very popular, down below. But availability is the risk that you're trying to protect, right? It's making sure that request for your application, your service, your business purpose, whatever that is delivered when it's requested. And the more you are ensuring that you have enough capacity to deliver that, the less likely you are to realize the risk or pay the burden of the risk that your availability will then cause you to lose customers. And again, if you relate this to the fundamentals, these are all important, right? Regulatory is probably a very much closer to fundamentals than others. They're all important. They all could have you lose customers. But they don't necessarily put you out of business in one shot, right? These are things that you can continue to tweak and grow, et cetera. My concern is really toward the bottom as we get there, that there are things that will put you out of business and you tend to know them. And so those are the things you should probably also code for.
So it's interesting to see, though, in the practice acronym and the framework that you have here, it's still some elements of the technology in the sense that servers, being availability, things of that nature, right? Including the business fundamentals that we're going to get into. And one of my favorites are next, cybersecurity.
Absolutely. This one just speaks for itself. It's the most active, concern in almost every industry. You name it, and it's a concern. They're bad actors, which is kind of the term for those who are trying to do nefarious things through cyber. And those bad actors are anywhere from an individual to a group of individuals to, as we know, whole sovereignties, whole countries, attacking others that are doing this. One of so this is a whole topic in and of itself. So really from this conversation's perspective, I included this just really to make the point that those things can also be codified. And there's because of the activity in that industry, there's many ways for that. One of the popular ways is policy enforcement points, because those tend to be things, again, like code or rules. If you're familiar with the concept of a firewall is a set of rules that says, if the computer that's trying to connect to my network to get my service has this pattern, right? This is coming from this address or this country or what have you, then allow it or don't allow it, right? That's like a firewall rule at a very, very, poorly abstracted level. That's a policy enforcement point. Or it could be, if you're familiar with AWS, things like security groups that have very similar structure. If it's this, then don't allow this or do allow that. Those are codifications, right? And those are things that you can change in and out and exchange without actually changing your entire code or your logic or your platform. And so those are a good example of the type of thing that you codify in this practice framework to protect from cyber risks.
And next we have testing.
Yeah, testing is a little bit different. Testing is more, it's still, I think, to be honest, you can test in any of these areas. You can test that your availability is working. We talked about testing in the sense of practicing, for chaos and creating that chaos. But the most popular, I think, approach to this is really ensuring that you're instilling quality into what you're delivering and testing for that quality. So this tends to come very often, especially nowadays, as actual code. This tends to be whatever language you're writing in, it tends to be additional modules in that language that actually go and test pieces of your code. So this one is probably the closest to traditional coding as you would think about in imperative coding, where there's a logic flow and et cetera to your test that you can repeat. And you want to make sure that every time you're delivering a change to the environment, that you have the opportunity to run those core tests that make sure that the quality is consistent between changes. Sorry, go ahead.
Now, quick question. So would you classify that under the concept of test-driven development? Would you put that under that bucket?
Well, the other way around, right? So the testing of quality is period, right? Testing and development is a mechanism. For those who are not familiar with it, it's basically saying, instead of writing the code of what I want to do, I want to, flash this letter on the screen 1,000 times. Instead of writing that flash 1,000 times, you're going to write, the test is, will it flash 1,000 times? You're writing the test first. And then you write the code and you keep testing it. So yes, in the sense that you write the code and you see if the code meets the test, yes, it's essentially that. So test-driven development leans into what I'm talking about. Okay. But really, you don't have to use test-driven development. Any sort of quality capability to say, hey, even after you write the code, if you write tests to check to make sure the quality of that code and the behavior of that code stays the same, I think it still falls into this pattern of just being mindful of the risk of not testing and the risk to the quality of your application. Again, that means you'll have bugs, right? You're gonna have bugs no matter what, but this means you may have more bugs, but it won't necessarily, again, put you out of business. These are just areas that you want to be wary of, and these are very common practices in the industry, right? There's nothing new here on those things.
Now moving into infrastructure.
Right. So availability is about, all of the available services and making sure that you have as many of them as you need. Servers, that we talked about at the beginning of the call, 10 servers. I want 10 servers. I'm going to say I want 10 servers. But infrastructure as code in general, the reason why I separated it is because it's really managing the entire operating environment as demands or conditions change. So it's not just about servers, it's about network infrastructure, all of the other moving parts that make your service available to the world as part of that availability structure. A very, very popular and very, sort of, it's almost becoming table stakes common practice nowadays is to move to an infrastructure as code where you can move these virtual machines, these virtual infrastructure components, and the things that connect them around at will using, again, either declarative or imperative. Declarative is more like statements that say, I shall have a server, it will have Windows, and it will be version 10. Whereas imperative is more a logic flow. Basically you go through and it's code, right? You essentially say, I need 10 of these, so I'm going to define the server, and then I'm going to loop through this 10 times to create it. So both patterns are in use. There's the whole companies and frameworks around those patterns of ways of defining that infrastructure. But this is the most common thing when you hear as code that you're going to hear in the industry right now is infrastructure as code. And it's important. It's an important piece of being able to operate and run your services beyond just availability, but just to make sure everything connects to each other.
Now, I think the last two are really tying into the business fundamental aspects. Can we dive into that, the customer?
Yeah, so this is kind of where it's not necessarily different. It's just saying, hey, can we apply everything we've taken up top that was focused on infrastructure and server and computers and network and say, can we take those same ideas and apply them to something a little bit more business oriented? And in this case, something like a customer And the risk area here, when I say from the customer, is the customer's behavior, the unpredictable behavior of a customer, AKA, Wall Street, Reddit, and meme stocks, right? It's completely unpredictable. There's no real logic, if you know anything about stocks, as to why people would start trading the stock this way. Well, there's a logic. They knew what they were doing, I guess. At some point, they realized what the impact of what they were doing is. But from a business perspective, that's an unexpected behavior. You would not have expected, I'm sure, in Robinhood's case, again, using them as an example, they wouldn't necessarily have expected that volume. And nowadays, with just kind of going on the Robinhood thread, with things like fractional shares and the retail customer being able to engage in trading on almost any stock these days, no matter what the price, because you can buy a piece of a stock now, those volumes and those things, exploded, right? And there are companies that are really ready to handle that, and there are companies that are not. The ones that are ready to handle it, I think, would adopt something like this, which is lean into the chaos of knowing that volume and that scale is going to be unpredictable. And so they're going to want to have flexibility in the rules that are going to govern their capability. If they know fundamentally that they, for whatever reason, and if we're sticking in the trading world, that they have to cover, during the settlement process, they have to cover a certain amount of money, and the trade volume breaches that amount of money, they better have in place a means to cut that off in some way, whether that's stopping trading or slowing something down or automatically going to borrow some other money from somewhere else to bring it in. I don't know if that's logical in the trading world, but my point being, whatever the mitigation is for the risk, try to codify as much of that mitigation as possible. And there's two pieces to that. There's business rules. And now traditionally we've looked at business rules as process-oriented things. As an insurance customer is coming in and they want auto insurance. So I'm going to ask them a few questions, and based on those questions, I'm going to route them one way or another. And you use business rules to how you route them. So that's process-oriented. In this case, we're talking about business rules that represent the fundamentals, right? There's a business rule that says I can't not have more than, $500 million in trade activity on this platform open at any one time. And if I reach that number, I have to do something. I have to either shut the door, turn off the lights, hold the line. I have to do something. And the more you codify that into your application, not as hard-coded something that somebody typed, but as a rule that you can pull in and adjust and change and tweak, the more flexible you make that, the more you're going to outpace your competitors who don't have that kind of capability. And the other important thing on this is also from a perspective of feature flags. So this is a up and coming sort of approach to managing turning things on and off. And by the way, everything we've talked about can be automated, but it doesn't necessarily have to be automated. It can still be codified and still be human driven, especially something like this, because sometimes you don't necessarily want to just stop everything if there's a human that can make a better decision as to what granularly to tweak. So feature flags is an important piece of that. So instead of writing your code to just have the logic with if, then, what you do is you essentially integrate with a feature flag platform and say, if this feature is currently for my environment on, then I'm going to go ahead and do this thing. If this feature is off, then I'm not going to allow this thing. And it's another way, another control. If you think about switches and buttons, it's another control that external parties in your company, like whether you're president or your technology team or some other person, can control the activity by turning features on and off if there's trouble.
And the last one, economic.
Yeah, so customer behavior is going to lead you to unpredictability, and you want to make sure that the customers are satisfied with your service. So you have to make a choice as to how to apply those feature flags and business rules to protect that. But economic there's just no choice, right? I used the Robinhood example earlier, but it really, in any company, if there is, let's say, for whatever reason, you take on 10,000 orders of some shirt if you're a retail business, and not only can you not fulfill that, but maybe you for whatever reason your code goes and borrows something or starts some process that you're now accountable to pay for, and you don't have the money. Literally, that could put you out of business the very next day, the very same day. And those kind of things are, I think, in my particular opinion, should be held up and known, and everyone in the company should be aware of them, and they should be as codified as possible. It's not possible to do everything, but as codified as possible to put into the same thing, into business rules and feature flags that allow you as your application to react to things that could put your business out of business. And you basically you're protecting your bottom line. You're not just like, hey, we lost money this year, but if this happens, we are out of business. Why not have that barrier there as a protection, and be sure that you can control that barrier and you can move it as you need to, because they're flexibly codified and they're not written, embedded in your code, deep in the bowels of your code that you can't really readily change.
I'm gonna take off the screen sharing now and
Sure.
listen, Mike. That is extremely fascinating. I know from our prior conversation you have a hard stop soon, so I want to be cognizant of that. Obviously, to the audience, we blew past 12:30, but that's what happens when Mike and I start talking. We could just go on forever and ever without hard stops. So but I see a lot from it, and we have to bring you on because I think we could dive deeper into this. But I see applications for AI, especially on the customer and economic side. Really, the customer looking for anomalies and acting upon that. From the economic side, I see some introductions, and like I said, we're just throwing ideas out. I see some introductions for blockchain and smart contracts, and looking at external oracles, monitoring the economic behaviors just globally, and some source like that externally, and actions happening from an automatic perspective. Those are some of the things from listening to you that I see off jump.
You hit it on the nose. Like blockchain and particularly smart contracts is exactly this, right? It's codification of something that was otherwise written in a document that some lawyer wrote up, and you might remember it's there, you might not. The developer who just joined your team may not even know that rule is there, and you may perform some business function or transaction that violates that rule. And if, depending on what that is, that could be a company that says, hey, you violated this and you lose this contract. Smart contracts will protect you from that. Smart contract is another, I didn't even put it on the framework, but it's another way to codify these rules, and your application can be aware of those rules.
Yeah, like I see, like I said, I see as I actually love your framework and ideas and different directions it could go. And with where we are in 2021, wait, let's see something here. Thanks for hosting, Nnamdi. Best of luck with the new venture, Mike. Okay. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, so I see basically the technology to me is not as relevant. It's a concept. Focus on that, and we can find the technologies depending on where we are in the world. Like right now, the big things: blockchain, AI. People talking about ML. It's just different things happening right now. Microservices, cloud. Who knows where we're going to be in 10 years and the resources we're going to have? The framework itself is the important thing. It's like. And then we could match whatever technology at the time to best suit our needs that are there. So I definitely like it. We have, I think from the audience, I don't know if we have any questions. It doesn't seem like it. Mike, I know you have a hard stop. So what are some closing thoughts?
Look, I think the framework itself tells you practice. Take these things seriously. Try them. Practice them. It doesn't have to be magic, automated, everything perfect. When practice does indeed make perfect. I know Nnamdi in his own or personal ventures will tell you that from the fitness and things like that, that the more you practice something, especially if you see it ahead of time on purpose, the more you're able to handle what to do with that in those scenarios. And what then the rules should be. Right? If you don't actually say, hey, can my system handle X, or can I, you don't even think about these things, then they catch you off guard. But if you practice and you realize, hey, I can actually support more volume or more activity or more customers doing these unexpected things, then the more you're going to be protected in the future. So just practice.
No, I love it, and I'm going to actually start using the acronym for my own practice, and just to add it in there. But no, it's definitely a good holistic approach when approaching applications. So I definitely like it. Mike, obviously this isn't going to be the last time you're on the show, and like I said, we could talk forever. So we're gonna be bringing you back, and let's dive into these concepts and other concepts. I really want to thank you for being a guest. Like I said, total honor. It's just an amazing story in itself, us having this conversation online after all the schools and careers and working together and stuff. So it's awesome. I want to do this again and again. Have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
And for the audience, thank you for tuning in. Really appreciate you guys. Yep, that will be it. Everyone take care. Cheers.
See ya.